He had spent 20 years building an empire where every man lowered his eyes when he walked into a room, until a black waitress looked straight at him and said one word no one else dared to say. Enough. The crystal chandeliers inside Moretti's steakhouse cast warm gold reflections across the marble floors while the sound of jazz floated softly through the crowded dining room, but none of the wealthy guests noticed the music anymore. Every conversation had stopped the moment Vincent Hale slammed his whiskey glass onto the table hard enough to make the silverware shake. "You think you can ignore me?" he barked, his voice thick with arrogance as he grabbed the wrist of the teenage busboy standing beside him. The boy couldn't have been older than 16, skinny shoulders trembling beneath his black uniform as he struggled to hold the tray balanced against his chest. "Sir, I'm sorry," the kid whispered quickly. "Your steak will be right out." Vincent tightened his grip. Sorry doesn't pay for bad service. Around them, wealthy diners looked away into their wine glasses and candlelight, pretending not to notice. That was how power worked in Manhattan. People protected themselves by staying silent. Especially inside Adrian Moretti's restaurant. Because everyone in New York knew who truly owned this place. The politicians eating imported ribeye upstairs knew it. The hedge fund managers knew it. Even the waiters carrying $1,000 bottles of wine knew it. Adrian Moretti wasn't just rich. He was the kind of man whose name made bankers whisper and rivals disappear from newspaper headlines overnight. And at that exact moment, Adrian stood on the private balcony overlooking the restaurant floor, one hand resting against the dark oak railing, his charcoal suit perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. Beside him, two security men shifted uneasily as the tension below spread through the room like smoke. Adrian's icy blue eyes followed the scene in silence. Vincent yanked the busboy closer. "Maybe people like you need to learn respect the hard way." The boy's tray slipped slightly. A glass tilted near the edge. And then heels clicked sharply across the marble floor. Calm. Steady. Unafraid. Zaria Bennett stepped between them before anyone could react. Her fitted black waitress uniform was simple compared to the diamonds glittering around the room, but somehow she carried herself with more dignity than everyone in the building combined. Her dark curls were tied neatly behind her head, her expression composed even as dozens of nervous eyes turned toward her. "Let him go," she said evenly. Vincent blinked in disbelief before laughing loudly. "Excuse me?" Zaria didn't move. "He made a mistake. You're making a choice." The entire restaurant froze. One of the bartenders quietly muttered a prayer under his breath because nobody spoke to powerful customers like that inside Moretti's. Nobody challenged men with money. But Zaria's voice never shook. "You don't get to humiliate people because you had a bad day." Vincent released the busboy only to step closer toward her, offended now that the room was watching. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Zaria folded her hands calmly in front of her apron. A grown man embarrassing himself in public. Somewhere near the back of the dining room, someone inhaled sharply. Another guest lowered his phone beneath the table, suddenly too nervous to record. On the balcony above, Adrian Moretti slowly straightened. For the first time all night, something shifted across his face. Not anger. Not amusement. Interest. Pure dangerous interest. Because every woman Adrian had ever met either feared powerful men or wanted something from them. But this waitress standing beneath golden chandelier light looked completely unimpressed by both wealth and intimidation. Vincent scoffed angrily. "You should watch your mouth." Zaria held his stare without flinching. "And you should learn that respect isn't something money can buy." Silence swallowed the room whole. Even the piano player stopped moving. Adrian's fingers tightened slightly around the railing as his eyes remained fixed on her. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, the most powerful man in Manhattan suddenly couldn't look away. The restaurant remained unnaturally quiet long after Vincent Hale stormed toward the exit with humiliation burning across his face. Crystal glasses still sat untouched on linen-covered tables while nervous conversations slowly returned in cautious whispers. Nobody wanted to be the first person to speak too loudly after a scene like that. Especially not under Adrian Moretti's roof. Zaria Bennett collected the abandoned whiskey glass from the table with calm hands, though she could feel dozens of eyes following her every movement. Some looked impressed. Others looked terrified for her. Near the service station, the teenage busboy she had defended still looked pale. "Thank you," he whispered shakily as she passed him. Zaria gave him a small smile. "You did nothing wrong, Luis." Before he could answer, the restaurant manager appeared beside them so suddenly both nearly jumped. Marcus Reed always looked nervous, but tonight sweat glistened along his forehead beneath the dim golden lights. "Zaria," he hissed quietly, glancing toward the upstairs balcony. "What were you thinking?" She continued stacking plates onto her tray. "I was thinking your customer should not put his hands on employees." Marcus lowered his voice further. "That was Vincent Hale. He owns half the shipping ports in Jersey. Then he can afford manners." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "Do you understand where you work?" Zaria finally looked at him directly. "I understand exactly where I work." Across the restaurant, the balcony above remained dark except for the faint glow of a single lamp near the railing. Adrian Moretti still stood there, silent as stone, watching the dining room below with unreadable eyes. Most people avoided looking at him for too long. Zaria did not bother looking up at all. That unsettled Marcus even more. "Listen to me carefully," he muttered. "Men like Adrian Moretti do not like problems. Then maybe men like him should stop surrounding themselves with cowards." Marcus nearly choked on air. "Keep your voice down." But Zaria had already picked up her tray and walked toward the kitchen. Her steps remained steady despite the pressure hanging over the room. She had spent her whole life around men who believed money gave them permission to disrespect people. Rich customers in Atlanta. Drunk. Businessmen in Brooklyn. Landlords who smiled politely before doubling rent prices. None of it impressed her anymore. Fear only worked when people accepted humiliation as normal. Inside the kitchen, steam rolled through the air while cooks shouted orders over sizzling grills. The chaos usually comforted her. Noise meant survival. Noise meant another shift completed and another paycheck coming Friday morning. But tonight felt different. Every employee seemed distracted. One dishwasher crossed himself dramatically when she walked by. Another waitress grabbed her arm near the refrigerators. "Girl, are you crazy?" Jasmine whispered. "That man upstairs could buy this whole block." Zaria tied her apron tighter around her waist. "Good for him." "No, seriously," Jasmine pressed. "People say politicians wait outside his office for meetings." "And?" Jasmine leaned closer. "And people disappear after disrespecting him." For the first time all evening, Zaria paused. Not because she was afraid. Because she was tired. Tired of hearing powerful men described like hurricanes everyone had to survive instead of people responsible for their own choices. She opened the cooler door and reached for fresh bottled water. "Maybe that is the problem," she said quietly. "Everybody acts like powerful men are above basic decency." Jasmine stared at her like she had lost her mind. Before she could answer, the kitchen suddenly fell silent. One by one, cooks stopped moving. Conversations died instantly. Even the grill chef lowered his spatula slowly. Zaria turned toward the doorway. Adrian Moretti had entered the kitchen himself. His dark charcoal overcoat rested perfectly against his broad shoulders while the soft restaurant lighting reflected against the silver watch at his wrist. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The entire room stiffened around him automatically. Adrian's icy blue eyes moved past every employee in the kitchen until they landed directly on Zaria Bennett. Then, after a long dangerous silence, the most powerful man in Manhattan spoke only 4 words. Come with me, Miss Bennet. The walk from the kitchen to Adrian Moretti's private office felt longer than usual, not because the hallway itself stretched far, but because every employee they passed immediately lowered their eyes and moved aside in complete silence. Zarya noticed it all. The fear. The obedience. The way grown adults straightened like schoolchildren the moment Adrian appeared beside them. He walked ahead of her without hurry, his polished black shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor while soft jazz drifted faintly from the restaurant downstairs. Expensive paintings lined the walls beside antique gold sconces, and the air smelled faintly of cedarwood and whiskey. Everything about Adrian Moretti's world radiated control. Power polished until it looked beautiful. At the end of the hallway, one of the security men opened a dark wooden door without speaking. Adrian entered first. Zarya followed. The office overlooked Manhattan through massive floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with midnight city lights. Rain had started falling outside, turning the glass into streaks of silver reflections. Shelves of leather-bound books covered one wall while a crystal decanter sat untouched beside a fireplace burning low against the quiet room. Adrian removed his overcoat slowly and draped it across a chair before finally turning toward her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. He simply studied her with the same unnerving stillness he had carried downstairs. Most men with power tried too hard to prove it. Adrian did not. That made him more dangerous. Do you usually speak to customers that way? He asked calmly. Zarya crossed her arms loosely. Do your customers usually grab teenagers? Adrian's expression did not change, but something flickered briefly behind his pale blue eyes. Interest again. Vincent Hale is not used to being embarrassed publicly. Then tonight was probably good for his character. A slow silence settled between them. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the Manhattan skyline while the fireplace crackled behind Adrian's desk. He moved toward the crystal decanter and poured a small glass of whiskey, though he never took a sip. Most people in this city spend their lives trying not to offend men like Vincent, he said quietly. You looked almost bored. Zarya shrugged lightly. Money does not impress me much anymore. Adrian looked up sharply at that. Anymore? She hesitated for half a second before answering. I grew up watching landlords smile while evicting families. Watching businessmen flirt with waitresses they would never respect outside restaurants. Rich people are still people, Mr. Moretti. He leaned one shoulder against the edge of his desk, studying her carefully. And what kind of person do you think I am? That question hung heavier than the others. Not because of fear. Because she sensed he almost never asked it honestly. Zarya glanced around the office slowly before meeting his eyes directly. The kind everybody obeys. Adrian gave a faint humorless smile. That is not an answer. Maybe it is. For the first time all evening, Adrian actually laughed under his breath. Small. Surprised. Like even he had not expected the sound to leave him. Then he opened a drawer and removed a thick white envelope, placing it neatly on the desk between them. Vincent Hale will not bother your staff again, he said. Consider this compensation for tonight. Zarya looked at the envelope but did not touch it. She already knew there was money inside. Probably more cash than she made in 3 months carrying plates through crowded dining rooms. I do not want it, she said calmly. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Most people would not refuse that envelope. Most people are tired of being treated like problems money can erase. Silence swallowed the room again. The rain outside intensified softly against the windows while the fire painted gold shadows across Adrian's sharp features. He watched her the same way men studied rare things they did not fully understand yet. You are different from the other women here, he said finally. Zarya shook her head slowly. No. I just do not bend as easily. Something about those words landed harder than either of them expected. Adrian straightened slowly from the desk, his expression unreadable once again, but the energy in the room had shifted. Because for the first time in many years, somebody had stood inside Adrian Moretti's world without asking him for anything at all. 3 nights later, Adrian Moretti sat alone inside the corner booth overlooking his restaurant floor while untouched scotch melted slowly against the crystal glass in his hand. The dinner crowd moved beneath soft amber lighting, expensive laughter drifting through the room beside the clinking of silverware and jazz piano, but Adrian barely noticed any of it. His eyes followed only one person. Zaria Bennett moved between tables with calm precision, balancing trays effortlessly through crowded aisles while wealthy guests unconsciously straightened whenever she approached. She never smiled too hard for tips. Never laughed artificially at bad jokes. Never performed desperation the way so many people in Manhattan learned to do just to survive. That alone fascinated him more than he cared to admit. "You are staring again," Luca muttered from across the booth. Adrian finally looked away from the dining room. Luca had worked beside him for nearly 12 years, long enough to recognize dangerous patterns before Adrian recognized them himself. "I do not stare," Adrian replied evenly. Luca raised one eyebrow. "You rearranged tonight's reservation schedule twice so you could sit in her section." Adrian took a slow sip of whiskey. "And yet my food still arrived cold." Luca almost smiled into his espresso cup. "You are becoming human. It is unsettling." Adrian ignored the comment and looked back toward the dining room just in time to see one of the wealthier guests sliding a folded $100 bill toward Zaria with a grin too confident to be respectable. Most waitresses in Manhattan would have taken it automatically. Rent was expensive. Survival was expensive. Pride did not usually pay utility bills. But Zaria calmly slid the bill back onto the table beside the man's untouched dessert plate. "You forgot your money," she said politely before walking away without slowing down. The man looked stunned. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly around the rim of his glass. Not anger. Something stranger. Admiration mixed with irritation. She refused everything too easily. Money. Fear. Influence. Every system Adrian understood stopped working the moment it touched her. Upstairs in his office later that night, he found himself replaying her words from 3 nights earlier. "I just do not bend as easily. Most people bent eventually. Pressure always revealed weakness." That was how power worked. But every time Adrian tested the edges around Zaria Bennett, she somehow stood taller instead. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Marcus stepped cautiously into the office holding a small velvet box. "The jeweler delivered this for tomorrow's charity gala," he explained carefully. Adrian opened the box. Inside rested an elegant diamond bracelet that caught the office light like frozen water. Expensive. Tasteful. Completely unnecessary. Adrian stared at it for several silent seconds before closing the lid again. "Send it downstairs," he said calmly. Marcus blinked. "To Miss Bennett?" Adrian gave a slight nod. Marcus looked genuinely alarmed. "Sir, respectfully, she does not seem like the type." Adrian's icy eyes lifted slowly toward him. "The type for what?" Marcus immediately swallowed. "Nothing, sir." 15 minutes later downstairs, Zaria stood beside the service counter checking receipts when one of the hostesses approached carrying the velvet box nervously. "This was left for you," she whispered. Several nearby employees immediately stopped pretending not to listen. Zaria opened the box carefully. The diamonds shimmered beneath the restaurant lights, elegant enough to cover months of overdue rent or hospital bills or groceries. The entire staff watched her face closely. Then, without changing expression, Zaria calmly closed the box again. "Please return this to Mr. Moretti," she said. The hostess stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Very." Upstairs, Adrian listened quietly while Marcus explained what happened. "She returned it immediately," Marcus finished cautiously. Silence settled over the office. Adrian leaned back slowly in his leather chair while rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking Manhattan. Most women chased luxury because the world taught them survival depended on attaching themselves to powerful men. But Zaria Bennett treated wealth the same way she treated intimidation. Like neither deserved automatic respect. Adrian loosened his tie slightly, something he almost never did. Interesting, he murmured under his breath. Luca studied him carefully from near the doorway. No, Luca corrected quietly. Dangerous. Adrian's eyes drifted once more toward the restaurant below where Zaria moved through golden chandelier light completely unaware that the most powerful man in the city was beginning to lose a battle he had never expected to fight. At 1:30 in the morning, Manhattan looked different from the windows of a black luxury sedan. The city lost its polished illusion after midnight. The expensive restaurants emptied. The businessmen disappeared behind penthouse doors. What remained were tired workers carrying grocery bags onto late buses and exhausted people trying to survive another week in a city that charged too much for breathing. Adrian Moretti sat silently in the back seat while rain blurred the glowing traffic lights outside into streaks of red and gold. He should have gone home an hour ago. Instead, he found himself watching the restaurant entrance through dark-tinted windows like a man waiting for something he did not understand. Then she appeared. Zaria stepped out of the restaurant wearing a long gray coat over her uniform, her curls slightly damp from the rain as she pulled the hood over her head. No expensive car waited for her. No boyfriend. No bodyguard. She simply adjusted the worn canvas bag on her shoulder and started walking alone down the sidewalk. Adrian frowned slightly. Where is her driver? Luca glanced at him from the front seat. I do not think she has one. Adrian kept watching her disappear into the rain. Follow her. Luca looked mildly horrified. You want to secretly follow the waitress now? Adrian's voice remained calm. Drive. The sedan moved quietly through wet Manhattan streets several car lengths behind Zaria. She passed crowded bars glowing with neon signs and 24-hour pharmacies where tired nurses grabbed coffee before overnight shifts. After 15 blocks, she still had not called a cab. She is walking home. Adrian muttered. In this weather? Luca checked the dashboard clock. Maybe she cannot afford $30 rides every night. Something about that answer unsettled Adrian more than expected. 15 minutes later, Zaria finally stopped outside an aging brick apartment building in Brooklyn where flickering hallway lights buzzed faintly behind scratched glass doors. The neighborhood was far from dangerous, but it was tired. Paint peeled from window frames. Old bicycles leaned against rusted fences. A laundromat across the street glowed beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Adrian stared through the rain-streaked window as Zaria climbed the apartment stairs carrying grocery bags he had not even seen her purchase along the walk. You investigated her, he asked quietly. Luca hesitated. Only basic information. Adrian did not respond. Luca sighed softly before continuing. 27 years old. No criminal record. Lives with her younger brother. Works double shifts 6 days a week. Brother? Ethan Bennett. College student. Medical history indicates congenital heart complications. Adrian's eyes lifted slowly. Heart complications. Luca nodded carefully. Several surgeries when he was younger. Silence settled heavily inside the car. Adrian looked back toward the apartment windows where a warm yellow light finally appeared on the third floor. A small shadow crossed the curtains moments later. Zaria. Home. Safe. He should have left then. Instead, something kept him sitting there while rain tapped softly against the roof of the car. 20 minutes later, the apartment curtains opened slightly. Through the narrow gap, Adrian caught a glimpse of Zaria sitting at a tiny kitchen table helping a young man with textbooks spread around them. Ethan looked pale but smiled constantly while she handed him a bowl of soup and corrected something on his laptop screen. The apartment itself was painfully modest. Cracked walls. Cheap furniture. A kitchen barely larger than one of Adrian's walk-in closets. But the room carried something his penthouse never had. Warmth. Real warmth. No fear. No performance. No people trying to impress anyone. Just exhaustion softened by love. Adrian watched Zarya laugh quietly at something her brother said before she reached over and pulled the blanket higher around his shoulders without even thinking about it. Such a small gesture. So natural. So gentle. Something tightened unexpectedly inside Adrian's chest. She never mentioned any of this, he said quietly. Luca glanced back at him carefully. People with dignity rarely advertise their suffering. Those words lingered in the silence. Adrian leaned back slowly against the leather seat while his eyes remained fixed on the tiny apartment window glowing against the rainy Brooklyn night. All week he had assumed Zarya rejected his money because she wanted power over him. But now, watching her count folded cash beside overdue bills while still smiling at her brother like none of it mattered, Adrian realized something far more unsettling. She rejected his money because she refused to let hardship turn her into someone willing to surrender her self-respect. And for the first time in years, Adrian Moretti suddenly felt ashamed of how little he understood about strength. By Friday night, the entire restaurant could feel the tension changing around Adrian Moretti. Employees who had worked for him for years noticed it first in the small details. He stayed longer downstairs instead of disappearing into private meetings. He stopped answering phone calls midway through dinner service just to watch the dining room quietly from his corner booth. Twice that week, he corrected wealthy customers for speaking disrespectfully to staff, something so unusual that even Marcus looked confused each time it happened. But Adrian himself understood the truth less than anyone. Because every time he saw Zarya Bennett moving through the restaurant lights with calm dignity untouched by greed or fear, something inside him became increasingly restless. And restlessness was dangerous in men like Adrian Moretti. Especially when rivals were already watching for weakness. Near midnight, rain hammered softly against the restaurant windows while the final dinner guests lingered over expensive wine and dessert. Zarya balanced 2 plates carefully through the crowded dining room when she noticed 3 unfamiliar men seated near the back corner booth. Dark tailored coats. Expensive watches. Smiles that never reached their eyes. They were not regular customers. Men who belonged in Adrian's world always carried the same invisible weight around them. Controlled. Observant. Calculating. One of them watched Adrian's balcony upstairs far more than the menu in front of him. Zarya felt the tension immediately. At the service station, Jasmine leaned closer nervously. "Do you see table 16, she whispered. Zarya nodded slowly. "What about them?" Marcus said they came in asking questions about Mr. Moretti's schedule. Zarya's expression tightened slightly. Upstairs on the balcony, Adrian stood beside Luca reviewing paperwork while city lights reflected across the rain-dark windows. "The Chicago investors arrive Monday," Luca explained quietly. "And Russo still refuses to back down on the port negotiations." Adrian barely listened. His attention drifted downward toward the dining room again almost automatically. Toward her. Luca noticed and sighed under his breath. "You realize people are beginning to notice." Adrian finally looked away from the railing. "Notice what?" "That your eyes follow a waitress through crowded rooms like a man forgetting himself." Adrian's jaw tightened slightly before he could answer. Downstairs, one of the unfamiliar men suddenly approached Zarya near the hallway leading toward the kitchen. He smiled politely, but something cold hid behind the expression. "You work closely with Mr. Moretti, correct?" Zarya kept her posture calm. "I serve food." Still, the man continued casually, "You probably know his routines better than most people." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" The man smiled wider. "Curiosity." Zarya glanced toward the balcony upstairs where Adrian remained deep in conversation with Luca. Every instinct in her body sharpened at once. She had spent enough years surviving New York to recognize dangerous politeness when she heard it. Then stay curious somewhere else, she replied evenly before stepping around him. The man's smile faded for half a second. Careful, he murmured softly behind her. Loyalty to powerful men can become expensive. Zarya stopped walking. Slowly, she turned back toward him. The hallway lights reflected against her dark eyes, calm but unshaken. Men who threaten waitresses usually do it because they are too weak to intimidate anyone stronger. The silence after her words felt razor-thin. Nearby staff froze, pretending not to listen. The man stared at her for several seconds before giving a cold, amused smile. Interesting. Then he walked away toward the exit with the other two men following close behind. Upstairs, Adrian had seen enough. By the time Zarya reached the kitchen, Adrian was already there waiting beside the stainless steel counters while cooks nervously avoided eye contact. "What did they say to you?" he asked quietly. Zarya untied her apron slowly. "Nothing important." Adrian stepped closer. "Do not lie to me." The sharpness in his voice made the room tense instantly, but Zarya did not flinch. "And do not order me around like I belong to you." The kitchen fell completely silent. Adrian stared at her while rain echoed faintly outside and steam curled through the bright overhead lights. For one dangerous second, neither of them moved. Then Zarya spoke again, calmer this time. "Your world keeps trying to test people through fear," she said quietly. "But fear stops working when somebody has already struggled their entire life." Adrian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Because deep down, he knew she was right. And that terrified him more than the rival men downstairs ever could. After midnight, rain flooded Manhattan while tension still lingered inside Moretti's steakhouse long after 3 suspicious men left the restaurant. In his office overlooking the storm, Adrian learned from Luca that Russo had sent them, not only to test boundaries, but possibly to test Zarya Bennett. Adrian immediately ordered tighter security around the restaurant and Brooklyn, silently confirming how personal the situation had become. Downstairs, Marcus warned Zarya to accept Adrian's drivers because people were beginning to notice the connection between them. She ignored him, unsettled by the growing realization that something deeper than attraction existed between her and Adrian, two lonely people recognizing pieces of themselves in each other. Outside beneath the awning, Adrian waited for her inside a black sedan and ordered her to get in, warning that Russo's men had asked questions about her. But Zarya refused to reorganize her life around fear. Adrian stepped into the rain, insisting he was trying to protect her. Then she quietly shattered the truth he hid from himself. "You are trying to control the outcome because you are terrified of losing something you cannot buy." Adrian stood frozen beneath the storm as she disappeared into the subway, realizing humanity felt far more dangerous than power ever had. For 2 weeks, Adrian Moretti stopped trying to impress Zarya Bennett with money, gifts, or protection she never asked for. Instead, he began listening, and the change quietly spread through the restaurant. Employees suddenly received overtime pay, healthcare, and approved leave without arguments, leaving even Marcus stunned by the transformation. Zarya noticed too, but remained cautious because charm was easy while real change demanded sacrifice. During an elite Manhattan charity event filled with politicians, investors, and wealthy socialites, Zarya worked silently among people who treated staff like invisible furniture. Across the ballroom, Adrian constantly found himself watching her. Later, a wealthy investor approached Zarya and implied her future depended on Adrian's interest. Calm but firm, she answered that her future was not for sale. Adrian overheard enough and crossed the room, shutting the conversation down with quiet authority. "Miss Bennett does not owe conversations to anyone," he said coldly, adding that respect should never depend on status. That night on the rooftop terrace overlooking Manhattan, Adrian admitted, power without respect becomes another form of fear. When he asked what he should do, Zarya answered softly, become a man people feel safe around, not just afraid of. 1 year later, Manhattan still whispered Adrian Moretti's name, but no longer with pure fear. Headlines now spoke of restaurant workers receiving health benefits, anonymous scholarships lifting poor students, and community kitchens feeding families through winter storms. Luca watched the transformation closely as Adrian quietly dismantled pieces of his old empire, insisting every donation remain anonymous because dignity matters more when nobody feels indebted. Across Brooklyn, Zaria Bennett stood outside a restored community center once abandoned and broken, now filled with children laughing beside bookshelves and warm meals. Ethan, healthier after treatment funded by unnamed support, asked if she still pretended not to know who made it possible. Before she answered, Adrian arrived beneath the falling snow. This time people greeted him without fear. Parents nodded respectfully. A child waved. Adrian awkwardly waved back. Standing beneath the soft entrance lights, he handed Zaria proof that another offshore company had been sold, another piece of the old Adrian gone forever. She finally smiled at him without caution, realizing he had become a man who understood love without respect was only another form of control.